I've got a special one for you today. Today, we're going to derive the Maxwell Lagrangian density. Or equivalently, you could say we're going to derive the Maxwell action, seeing as the action's just the four-dimensional space-time integral of the Lagrangian density in this case. So the basic idea here is that we're going to start with the Maxwell equations in the way they're usually written, at least most famously written, which is the integral equations, and we're going to take them through a series of different formulations. And those changes will ultimately lead to a formulation where the action can be readily reverse engineered straight from the equations of motion. So fundamentally all we're doing is we're looking at the equations, the Maxwell equations, and saying, well, these ought to be the equations of motion of some Lagrangian density, so let's reverse engineer what that Lagrangian density has to be. The integral equations are quite hard to work with for this purpose at least, so you can't just straight up deduce the Lagrangian from that, at least not easily, and so the first step, the first of these series of changes in the formulation, is to go from the integral formulation to the standard differential formulation. So we use Stokes' theorem and the divergence theorem to go from the integral form to the differential form. And then the second change in formulation is to go to the Lorentz covariant differential formulation. So we recognize the Lorentz symmetry of Maxwell's equations and then figure out how to assemble the various fields and derivatives and things involved into four vectors and four tensors and then express the Maxwell equations in terms of them. This is the form that you can readily reverse engineer the Lagrangian density from. So I guess it's not really a long series of changes in formulation, it's really only two, integral to differential and then differential to covariant tensor, but I still called it a series, whatever. At least there are two of them, so it's still plural. Then once we have the action, well, that's the end of the video. The whole point of the video is to figure out how to conclude the Lagrangian density for the Maxwell equations from the seemingly totally unrelated integral Maxwell equations. At least they're seemingly totally unrelated at first glance. So here is the math portion where I show you all the details of doing this. The approach to deriving the Maxwell Lagrangian taken here starts with the integral Maxwell equations shown below and consists of re-expressing them in a few different ways in sequence until they are in a form that easily allows an action to be deduced. So basically the goal is to reverse engineer the action from the equations of motion, which are taken to be the Maxwell equations. These are the integral Maxwell equations. The first change of formulation arises from the application of Stokes' theorem and the divergence theorem, shown here, written for an arbitrary vector field f, to the integral Maxwell's equations. When we apply them to the integral Maxwell equations, we get the differential Maxwell equations shown here. Specifically, the divergence theorem is used first on the two Maxwell equations that involve closed surface integrals to get the two differential Maxwell equations that involve divergences of the electric or magnetic field. And then Stokes' theorem is used down here on the Maxwell equations that involve closed line integrals to get the Maxwell equations in differential form that involve curls of the electric and magnetic field. With the differential form established, the next step towards the ultimate goal of discovering a Lagrangian density for Maxwell's equations is to introduce potentials for the electric and magnetic field and then write Maxwell's equations in terms of them. This is done by constructing general solutions to the homogeneous equations in the set and then substituting those solutions in terms of the potentials into the inhomogeneous equations. The general solutions of the homogeneous equations are based off of the following two facts, which are true for any arbitrary vector field and scalar field. These vector calculus identities here allow us to write general solutions to the homogeneous Maxwell equations and then through those re-express the inhomogeneous equations in a useful way, which reduce the number of equations we have to deal with. So if we take this Maxwell equation and this identity, we can identify the general solution for B as being the curl of some other vector field. Then, observing this Maxwell equation here and this vector calculus identity, we can conclude that this is the general form of the electric field. One can then insert these into the homogeneous equations to get second-order partial differential equations for the potentials. So inserting this definition into this Maxwell equation gives us this equation. It's second order for the potentials. And then we can take this inhomogeneous equation, and we need both of the potential formulas. Plugging them in gives us this equation here. It also turns out to be useful to rewrite everything in terms of mu naught instead of epsilon naught. This can be accomplished by remembering that c squared equals 1 over mu naught epsilon naught, which means that mu naught equals 1 over c squared epsilon naught. Therefore, the potential equations can be rewritten productively in this form. From here, there is one last step towards the end of writing Maxwell's equations in a form ripe for reverse engineering the Lagrangian density. This step is to write Maxwell's equations in relativistic notation. Doing this is made easier by temporarily transitioning to Cartesian coordinates. The following box contains Maxwell's equations expressed in Cartesian coordinates, also with a little bit of rearrangement and algebraic manipulation just to make it more clear how to write this in relativistic notation once that notation is established. Lorentz invariance was first discovered in Maxwell's equations. Hendrik Lorentz discovered that the following so-called Lorentz transformations represented an invariance of the theory. So these are the x-direction Lorentz transformations, the y-direction Lorentz transformations, and the z-direction Lorentz transformations. The complete set of these represent an important invariance of the Maxwell equations, which is simply called Lorentz invariance. From the form of the transformations of the various fields, the set of x, y, and z direction Lorentz transformations simply correspond to a set of four-dimensional coordinate transformations if one takes the electric and magnetic fields to be part of a four-dimensional rank 2 contravariant tensor, the charge and current densities to transform like the components of a four-dimensional contravariant vector, the scalar and vector potential to form a contravariant 4-vector, the space and time coordinates to form a contravariant 4-vector, and the space and time derivatives to form a contravariant 4-vector. Of course, various factors of C are required to maintain dimensional consistency. Additionally, one can obtain covariant versions of these four-dimensional objects by raising and lowering indices with the metric listed below. This is immediately important because a 4-vector of partial derivatives that transforms like a covariant 4-vector under Lorentz transformations appears in Maxwell's equations, in addition to its contravariant version. Specifically, the complete set of Lorentz transformations represents four-dimensional coordinate transformations if one takes the various fields and derivatives of classical electrodynamics to transform as components of the following four-dimensional vectors and tensors. The coordinates become a 4-vector, the derivatives become a 4-vector, the currents and charge become a 4-vector, the vector potential and scalar potential become a 4-vector, and the electric and magnetic fields fit together into a four-dimensional rank 2 antisymmetric tensor. We can take a look at the formulas for the electric and magnetic fields in terms of the scalar potential and the vector potential, and also realize that both the derivatives and the potentials fit together into 4 vectors, and arrive at this formula for this f mu nu tensor, often called the Faraday tensor, in terms of the 4-vector derivatives and 4-vector potential. We can also get the covariant version of the various contravariant vectors we've defined here by simply index juggling with this metric. It's called the Minkowski metric. In short, Lorentz invariance demands that space and time be treated on equal footing. If one rewrites the potential equations in terms of these four-dimensional vectors and tensors, then they appear like this. These are the inhomogeneous equations. I haven't bothered to write out the homogeneous ones because we already solved the homogeneous ones by the form of these potential formulas for the electric and magnetic field, which gave us this formula for the Faraday tensor. So basically, by stating this formula for the Faraday tensor, we are encoding the same information that the homogeneous Maxwell equations originally gave. So if we make the statement of the inhomogeneous equations in terms of the Faraday tensor and then state that the Faraday tensor has this formula, we have all the same information present. In arbitrary coordinates, this becomes the following, written down here, where one always selects the metric to be equal to the Minkowski metric in the desired coordinate system to ensure that they correctly represent the Lorentz invariant Maxwell equations in flat space. Or if you are dealing with some curved manifold, like if you're coupling it to gravity, then one must select a curved space-time that's still Lorentzian, so that while they aren't the flat Maxwell equations anymore, they at least do still account for special relativity properly, where f mu nu doesn't require covariant derivatives because the Christoffel terms just cancel out. So you can see that I replaced this derivative with a covariant derivative, but I didn't specify a formula for f mu nu that's different, one where covariant derivatives have replaced the partial derivatives. If we plug covariant derivatives in and expand out what that looks like, we find that this term is identical to this term but with an opposite sign. So then partial derivatives actually work here, just given the unusual form of the Maxwell field strength tensor, or the Faraday tensor as I've been calling it. It is important to note one more thing about f mu nu and Maxwell's equations before the action is introduced. And this is the fact that f mu nu and Maxwell's equations are U1 gauge invariant. If we transform a mu like this, and then we apply that transformation to f mu nu, we see that it goes unchanged, and obviously Maxwell's equations does too, because it only contains a mu in this f mu nu tensor, which we've just shown is invariant. This is a U1 invariance because we can successively transform the gauge field, and all that amounts to is adding the parameters of the successive transformations, which just equals a third type of transformation. So it's a group, and it's specifically a group with multiplication that is that of U1. In order to be able to study the effects of gauge invariance with the Lagrangian formalism, one must ensure that the accepted Lagrangian not only has Maxwell's equations as its equations of motion, but is also U1 gauge invariant in addition to being Lorentz invariant. Given that the Euler-Lagrange equations for a theory with such field content will take this form, the only action that is both Lorentz invariant and U1 gauge invariant that reproduces Maxwell's equations as its equations of motion is the following, where the sign and the particular placement of the constants is the standard convention. Also, this term, while it might not look immediately gauge invariant, it actually is gauge invariant if the vector potential and the four-current density vanish at infinity. In that case, the gauge variation of the term integrates to zero because the variation term is a total derivative as a result of the continuity equation. This continuity equation allows us to add this extra term here by saying basically we're just adding zero. So we know the value of the variation is this, and if we can add that extra term on, then we can just unproduct rule it and arrive at the fact that the variation term equals a total derivative. The desired Lagrangian density is therefore simply the integrand of the action we've already written, which is just that, and therefore we have finally completed the derivation of the Maxwell Lagrangian. We have concluded through a bunch of reformulations of Maxwell's equations that the Lagrangian density that corresponds to those complicated looking integral equations actually is this, which perhaps is a bit surprising and also really cool. So now you've seen the math portion where I show you how to conclude the Maxwell Lagrangian density from the integral Maxwell equations. Hopefully it was in sufficient detail and was sufficiently clear for this video to be illuminating enough to have been worth your time. The process is pretty simple, but the math can get a little bit long, and there's certainly a lot of conceptual things that you need to keep track of along the way. Hopefully this helped you do that. If you liked the video, please click the like button and subscribe. Dirac out.